We got to make voting great again. This is my new initiative this year. I wasn't always like this, but now I'm like, you know what? I'm taking this route. I think this is what we need. So I'm not opposed necessarily to women voting. Obviously, this is a constitutional amendment. I don't think there's any leeway at all for that to ever change. It's not possible, or it's so far unlikely it's just kind of irrelevant. But I made it a commitment earlier this year on Twitter, and then I posted on Instagram. I got banned on Instagram temporarily for it. But I said I'm never voting for a woman again, anywhere. And the only exception I would ever make is from Melissa Isaac, who just spoke here earlier today, ever. I told her that like a year ago. So I'm done voting for women. If you want to vote, do your thing. It's your right, legally at least and politically. But as far as voting for a woman candidate, primaries, general election, I'm done. If it's man versus woman, I'm either voting for the man or not voting at all, period, every time. If it's two women running in like a primary race or even a general, not voting. I did this earlier this year for the Florida primaries and because I'm done. The general election's coming up, same thing. I'm done voting for women. I do not believe under any circumstances women belong in government, leading governments, particularly like a presidency, a vice presidency, a governorship, anything like that, but anything. I'm just done. School board, mayor, state congressman, senator, whatever, I don't care. I'm done. It's not normal for thousands and thousands of years of government, civilized history. I think our founding fathers would find it appalling. It is bizarre, and women shouldn't run. That doesn't mean they can't run. I'm not advocating for laws to stop them from doing that. They should voluntarily not do it. My grandma would never do that. People find this amusing. I'll tell you guys, after my grandfather died, she would still vote, but she would call my uncle and ask him who to vote for. She would only, because he was the oldest male in the family after that point when my grandpa died. I think my grandpa right now is like 86 years old. I'm 34 by comparison, right? So he was much older than me. So anyway, she would only vote how he instructed her to, or not vote at all. And that's not the exact same situation here, but fundamentally it reminds me of that. Women should not run for government. You should not operate the government. You should not lead it. And now I want to mention too a presidency aspect, because Ayn Rand, my favorite philosopher years ago, she was on Phil Donahue like in the late 70s, and they asked her on this big TV show about voting for a woman president. Would you ever vote for one? And she was like, no. And they got really upset and all this stuff. They even asked her, like, what if a woman was better qualified than a man? Ayn Rand said to Phil Donahue, well, if it had fallen that low, I might. And the women were like aghast. You could hear them like, it's actually on YouTube, you should go watch it. But she actually explains a little bit more of a theory on why this is, particularly the presidency, because at the time she would still vote for women running for government and other offices, congressmen, senators, stuff like that. The presidency in particular, in our country anyway, in America, of our federal government, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military. And in Ayn Rand's view, she was born in the Soviet Union, she fled to America to flee communism and stuff. This was just insane to her, that you would put a woman in charge of men at this profound level of an entire military, not just even a particular branch, the whole thing. The nukes, the military, the Air Force, everything. That to me is just crazy. There's no point in human history up till extremely recently, with the exception of queens, right, the divine right of all this stuff. But this is not normal. I think our founding fathers are not supported at all, so I'm just done. I'm not voting for a woman ever again. Ever, 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 unless Melissa runs. Then we'll consider it. We'll see. Already got this one. Not sure why this is up here. Mistake. So make women great again. That's my speech. I appreciate you guys tuning into the speech. If you ask me questions, I'll take it. But that's my brief, comprehensive overview of what Make Women Great Again is, what it's about, and what needs to happen for American women in this country. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'll take some. Otherwise, I will gladly take a break. So we got one there.
Okay. I think it's very interesting, the points that you made about voting. I think after the election, and I'm also from another country, so I can kind of look at what's going on in at a greater sense. And it's not just in America. There's a lot of voting issues in a lot of different countries. And now that we're on digital machines, how are these auditable? if you don't have a paper trail at all. There's some countries where they have no paper trail. It's just digital. So I'm also not saying, I mean, I think it would be easy to restrict voting to get rid of this fraud and all this nonsense that is happening. And I don't understand why people aren't talking about it. You know, we had that whole investigation, and there's a lot of other investigations in a lot of different countries that are going on. Why is nobody talking about these issues with digital? You know, it's a huge problem. And
if I can comment on what you're saying here, I think the average person is basically asleep. It's basically as a sheep. I mean, that's it. Sometimes it's easy to say like a ton of people are stupid. Think about how stupid the average person is. Like comedians have said stuff like that, stand-up comedians. But I don't really think that IQ or stupidity is as much of the issue as people are just asleep. They sleepwalk through their whole life. I mean, not just in politics and government and their country and whatever, it's everything. They get fat, are asleep, they just do what they're told, they're obedient in all the wrong ways, right? They're not obedient to some husband that loves them or whatever you want to call it, and some family. They're obedient to a boss who doesn't care about them, or some woke corporation that's just going to fire them as soon as they can automate their job. So yeah, people are just asleep. I mean, first of all, that's how I look at it with voting or anything else. They just totally tune out to everything in the world around them.
yeah, I don't know how we can start talking to people about this issue. I mean, back in the day, it used to be you could only vote if you were male and you owned land, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and you were responsible to the draft if, you know, I don't understand why it's such a problem for you to look at it from a logical perspective. You know, people who vote are people who will be drafted.
So in my understanding of American history anyway, early voting not only was attached to these certain conditions, some of which are racial, which I'm glad those are gone. That's fundamentally good. But voting fundamentally back in the early parts of our country's history, it was not considered a right. Not in that you don't have the right to do it. It would have been bizarre to them if you told them it was a right to anyone, even men who were voting at the time, right? White landowners, whatever. It didn't exist like that. Voting was seen more as like a jury duty. It was like an administrative duty that you had to go out and do that was kind of a pain in the ass, but you did it anyway. Kind of like jury duty today. At some point along the way, late 1800s and early 1900s, this changed. Voting became a right. It's a right. I mean, look at today. The propaganda for it's insane. Use your right. Go vote. Duh, 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 duh. This is not, for a lot of American history, this is not the case. People just didn't care. They weren't involved. And it was seen as more sacred. So the idea, our modern conception of voting being some individual, unalienable right, like your right to life, to own property, to defend yourself, to pursue happiness, voting was not seen with that. You know, it's not in the Declaration of Independence, right? The right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and voting. Voting is not in there. Never was, not even as a potential. So that's a huge propaganda battle. I don't have an easy answer for it, but that was a pretty recent change in history. And I don't think it's a right. I think it should be limited, maybe not to landowning, but like, even if you limited voting to just taxpayers or even tax filers, even if you didn't pay a single dollar in taxes, this would radically alter voting demographics in the United States. Much as, you know, women got the right to vote, or the ability to vote, this changed everything.
So you don't think it's possible to have that conversation at all? I mean, I can understand that every time that I try to talk to anybody about this, even in my personal life, it's hysteria.
Yeah,
this is a right. No, it's not. It really, historically, it isn't. But, you know, it's so difficult.
So one of my favorite speakers that I've invited here a couple times, but the vax mandates and stuff keep blocking it, is Professor Janice Fiamengo, a woman who's been on my channel many times. I think an incredibly powerful speaker for women and against feminism and for men. And she talked to my channel one time when I was interviewing her on the Red Man group. She was talking about how the West probably isn't going to survive decadency. And this is a word you don't hear used that often, decadent, right? Maybe in a movie or something. But I thought about what she said and I was like, that's a really good point. We are so wealthy in America, and then, you know, our allied nations, Canada, Britain, the UK, Australia and stuff. We have so much wealth and we're on so much power left over from like World War II and all the powers changes that happened geopolitically then. Yeah, I mean, it might be the fall of Rome in the near future, next couple decades or whatever. I don't know. No one really knows for certain on that. Everyone has an opinion, right? Every conspiracy theorist is like, it's coming any minute. Buy my fucking vitamins right now. Buy my food bucket. The only of mine, my toothpaste. You got to buy my toothpaste. Maybe we will, and maybe, you know, it'll be like a balkanization. Maybe it'll be kind of like a Soviet Union collapse, and we'll have different countries. Maybe it'll stick together and we'll hold together. able to be this big renewal of masculinity and femininity and family. And then through that, politics lives downstream from culture. Maybe that'll change. That's why I do what I do with these conventions and this whole everything at the 21 Studios. You know, it's not just politics, it's the culture that changes everything. And politically today, these issues are none of them really give a shit. Conservatives will give you a little bit of lip service about like family and a little bit of masculinity now and stuff, but it's all fake. 99% of it's fake. They don't give a crap about masculinity, they don't give a crap about family, they don't give a crap about fatherhood. You know, they're basically all feminists. I would say 90% of conservatives today, in the Republican Party or otherwise, right, that vote, all their views, and almost all their views, would have been considered radical feminism 20 years ago, 25 years ago. These people just lose and apologize and adopt everything that their political opponents do. I mean, so yeah, it's thinking about that though, that especially the conservative women, I call them conservative sluts, conservative skanks, these fake conservative women that they're all basically just radical feminists. I find it appalling. You know, they consider themselves traditionally conservative. It's like, you're a radical feminist from like 1994. Get the fuck out of here. Anyway, I don't interrupt you too much. Thank you. You have a question? Oh, here she goes.
Not necessarily a question, but on the voting, I understand your grandmother because my husband tells me how to vote so that we have 2 votes. And I never, ever would vote against what he said, which is part of the submission thing,
Yeah.
which means that our example as women for submission in the Bible is Sarah. And her husband tried to give her to Pharaoh. Now, she didn't follow up on that. And when push came down to shove, she did tell Pharaoh that she was already married to Abraham, and Abraham got in a little trouble about it. So, but read it, it's in Genesis.
Thank you. Question? Last one, Erin?
Yes, thank you. So it seems to me that both girls and girls would learn in their household how the example of a feminine and submissive woman from their mother, ideally, but also fathers play a huge role in teaching a daughter how to take correction.
Yes.
And be submissive. And fathers also play a huge role in teaching sons how to lead and give correction. So I just wonder your thoughts on, I guess, the state of teaching children, both leadership and followership, considering that so many kids are getting raised in fatherless homes currently.
Can you be a little bit more specific? Like, do you want me to comment on the fatherlessness situation, the tidal wave of single motherhood?
I'm curious about how we fill in the gap. You know, how do we even teach young girls, right?
Yeah.
I'm just taking from the position of my perspective as if I'm going to take full personal responsibility for the role I play in the hierarchy of women, right? How do I support young girls to learn how to be submissive when they're being raised by masculine women who are trying to be both their mom and their dad in single mother homes a lot of the time?
The situation is not good, so I think I understand what you're kind of asking or getting at. There, like I mentioned a minute ago, just kind of casually, there is a tidal wave of single motherhood and fatherlessness in this country, particularly with Black Americans, but also whites and Hispanics. Asians are doing significantly better, but even that's gone through the roof. Single motherhood in this country 100 years ago, I think, was like 2%. It was like a single-digit percent. It was super low. In the Black community in America, I think it's around 70, and whites and Hispanics are in the 40s. It's huge. This is a serious problem because this is kind of a one-way street. When you have broken homes and broken families, and Richard Grandin spoke to you guys yesterday, he would call it intergenerational trauma. It's like a snowball going down a hill. So it's not good. And that, I think, also feeds into or alongside the decadency I was talking about a minute ago. So there are catastrophic problems facing our country and even beyond America, Western civilization, that are coalescing. And even in the most aware elements of political culture today, the things that I even support and like, they're just like clueless to this stuff, or they're only vaguely aware of it. As a positive counterexample though, in Florida earlier this year, our governor, He put together, and they signed into law with the Lincoln legislators, a like $100 million or so fatherhood fund for fathers in Florida. So that was a good step in the right direction to kind of actually facilitate what you're saying and support fathers being fathers and support all these kids who don't have fathers around and stuff. It's a bad situation basically, and I don't know if there's definitely no guaranteed way out of it. I mean, anyone promising you some guaranteed path out of this giant tidal wave of single mothers, they're lying to you. This is a big problem because single mothers, as most of you probably know, they're the worst parents in America. That's a fact, not an opinion. They raise the worst children. Not single fathers, which also that's not good. It's single mothers. Their children come out really super screwed up. Divorce rates in the future, drug problems, prison problems, violence, all behavioral learning disorders. Like it's amazing how bad it is. So it's not an easy problem to fix. The one hope that I have, I think the manosphere, which is this event and the others and the whole 21 Studios and all the speakers you see here too, with their own content and their own channels, I think the manosphere is the most important movement alive in America today and in the West. Because it's the only thing, in my view and my understanding of all this, and I track this shit like a hawk, that's doing anything at serious scales to push back against feminism and all this dogma and this propaganda that they've fed. We live in a feminist culture. Everything's feminist. The government's feminist, your state government's feminist, the federal government's feminist, the FBI's feminist, the military's feminist, the church is feminist, the school's feminist, the high school's feminist, the college is feminist, Walmart's feminist. Everything's fucking feminist all the time, literally all of it. They have dominated culture with this toxic garbage to such an astounding degree that we're like fish in water. We're not even aware of it. But the manosphere is the one thing pushing back against that tooth and nail. I think that there's even government agencies like Homeland Security and stuff that have been investigating the manosphere now, and I think they want to basically demonize it and just vilify it basically. Because it's a threat. It's a threat culturally and peacefully against all this garbage. It's causing all these problems with single motherhood and fatherlessness and all this stuff. That's the only thing I see today. There's no more cigar bars, right? Your church is all woke and feminist. Your schools are feminist. The government's feminist. Even the Boy Scouts, they don't even exist anymore. I was growing up in the 90s. There was Boy Scouts. Now there's no Boy Scouts. They're just the Scouts. They're even getting sued by the Girl Scouts, I think. That's how retarded our culture has become. The Girl Scouts are suing the former Boy Scouts, which basically got a vasectomy or something, or the snip. It's no longer the Boy Scouts. They've castrated the Boy Scouts, right? This shit's falling apart. But the manosphere I have a lot of hope for. That's something that's been a part of my life since I was 17 years old. I love it. I think it's fundamentally a positive force, even if it's not perfect. And I'm doing everything I can to make it better, and to make it stronger and more powerful, and actually have a huge impact on culture and shift the course of American history, which is extremely hard. I think people underestimate that because everyone's going to change the world with like a PayPal account or a YouTube channel. And it's not that easy. You need the amount of impact and influence and views. Like my friend Andrew Tate, you guys probably saw that recently blow up, right? He blew up to such an astounding degree. He was actually moving the needle on young boys in America and in the West. They axed him. Big tech, billionaires had a hissy fit, bitch fit. Instagram, YouTube, Stripe, PayPal, newsletters, hosting. His banks were canceling him. It's crazy. Because he got 12 billion views in a few months on TikTok and like another billion on YouTube and all this stuff. You need views. My channel is doing crazy. Like we're having a huge impact. We've done 19 million views in the past 30 days. That's amazing for me as an entrepreneur. I'm very proud of it. But I want that number to be 190 million. I want it to be a billion, like Tate had, because that's what you actually need to influence people. Words are the most powerful weapon in the world. That's why this huge battle over free speech, it keeps getting more and more intense. Because if they could control the language, they control information. If they control information that you have access to, your eyes and your ears and your brain, they control you. You're a slave, and you don't even know it. If someone censored me successfully on the internet, you would never get marketing information from me or videos or anything. You literally wouldn't be in this room right now. You'd have no idea the event even exists because they would be controlling you in ways you don't even see. That's how real propaganda works and real influence. And these people pushing this crap, they're going for it 1,000 miles an hour. So I think the manosphere is the only thing that can really, facilitate what you're talking about, make a huge impact. And that's why I fight for it every day of my life.
Thank you.
End rant. Thank you.